right. Welcome everyone to our first podcast of 2022. We're back. We are the EAM experts at Visual K. Today we have Luis Echevarria and Angel Torres or Angel. Ernesto took the day off. He's apparently working, but he'll be back. You get to see him again. Today we're going, well, typically we're looking forward, right? Looking into new technology, looking into trends, and try to give you an idea of what's coming. However, if you think about the way you drive a car, you're typically looking forward, not looking at your smartphone, but there's a rear view mirror, right? And today I think we're going to look a little bit into the rear view mirror and look at some of the basics. The year is 2022, and we're still finding some people are out there that are struggling with today's topic. Today we're going to discuss asset nomenclature and asset hierarchy, regardless of your system. So let's get started. Luis, anything before we hit the road here?
Yeah, I think basically, yeah, there's quite a few clients that, right, and customers that typically find it hard to know their way around their assets. I mean, they have difficulties, they rely on descriptions, and typically it doesn't work like that. I mean, it has to be something that has some structure, that has some meaning, because that's at the end the end result that you're gonna get. I mean, based on how you name it, it's how you're gonna get those make easier, right? The lookup for those type of assets in the system.
Actually, that is a great segue into the topic. So I guess that some of you might be wondering why bother with this. There's a couple of reasons. We're trying to keep this conversation very simple. However, at some point in time, we're going to use PowerPoint just to illustrate some of these ideas. And I think it's a picture speaks 1,000 words. So for those of you that are listening to this podcast on Spotify, we may also suggest for you to look it up on our YouTube channel so that you can see some of the images, of course. So let's start answering the question, why bother, right? So Luis, why bother with asset nomenclature and hierarchy?
I think that the first thing that comes into my mind is you are always on the lookout for things within your asset registry, right, or your system registry. So why have it so complex, right? If you name it right, you have a codification that you can rely on. Use it, because that will help you find your things, right? Find those assets so that you can create work orders, create anything that you're required against that specific equipment, right? So I think that's kind of the first thing that it kind of helps you around why do this, right? Why do an actual asset nomenclature, right? And an actual hierarchy within the software.
Yeah, so it's a good point, right? The easier it is for people to find stuff, the better the information that you're going to gather. And then there are some assets that somehow they move around, right? There are assets with you can take out of your production, out of your system, send it somewhere to be overhauled, retooled, and then they come back, right? But not necessarily to the exact same place where they used to be, right? So keeping track of that is also one of those things that, having the right nomenclature and then obviously having the right hierarchy will help you do. What else is there? Why should we bother?
Well, a couple of things more, right? I think costing, right? The typical software that exists for asset management rely on structures to kind of look out what is my maintenance cost at different levels, right? So you can see it at that lowest level, that pump, for example, that you're kind of doing some work to it, or you can see it 2 or 3 levels up in the hierarchy, and you want to know exactly how much this system is costing us to maintain,
Mhm.
right? So having that hierarchy correct, having that nomenclature that really drives it out and identifies the pieces of equipment that are critical in your operation, then that is something that's going to give you some results in terms of costing.
Okay.
That
All
is
right.
something really, really powerful to have.
Another thing that we have seen with our customers and some of the experiences that we have is that sometimes people, because maybe they can't find exactly which asset it is, sometimes they rely on creating work for the plant, right? And they're
Yeah,
actually working with something very, very specific, but because of, either a time constraint or that it's hard to find the specific asset that you need to work with, you end up creating kind of like this generic
yeah,
work order for the plant, right? So
yeah,
certainly we need to be more specific, we need to be more accurate when it comes to repairs, when it comes to inspections. We want to make sure that we're, actually recording which specific asset we're working with, right? Um,
yeah,
the other thing, and this is something that we experienced last year, is that we began working with the guys at Infor and also with some artificial intelligence, putting together some predictive models, and we found it very, very hard, right, to get up to that level of predictive analytics with the kind of, asset nomenclatures, the kind of hierarchies that we have seen, the kind of work orders that were being created because they were not specific enough, right? So
yeah.
um, again, thinking about the, our driving experience, certainly we're looking forward to artificial intelligence and predictive maintenance. However, we need to look back at our asset registry, make sure that everything is in place and it's in the right place. So whenever you're trying to fit all of that information into your predictive model, it actually makes sense.
Right, right. Because you don't want to get into those type of software such as AI, invest a lot, and then figure out that, hey, you have to go back, rearrange things so that you can get some results out of it. I mean, that is something that we really have to take a look at before engaging those type of environments.
Right, right. So this is again fundamental. And as we try to get more juice out of our systems, we're finding ourselves in a situation where the information, the data is not quite what it needs to in order for you to actually make something out of it, right? So
Yeah.
these are some of the reasons why we should bother, right? We should take the time, and it's never too late, right? Remember the experience that we had with the power plant somewhere in the Detroit area?
Yeah, yeah,
Can,
absolutely.
can you talk to that?
Yeah, and basically we have to kind of review everything and practically rearrange most of the things because at the end, yeah, you might get that you did a work order at the higher level or you did a work order at the lower level. But in the interim, you kind of lost a lot of things in there, right? A lot of history, a lot of things that, for example, there's equipment that you might take out and you can do maintenance X amount of times. After that, you cannot use it, right? For that, how you keep track of those if you don't have it in the specific correct place in the hierarchy, and as well, be able to identify it, right? Know exactly that you did the work against it, right? So it was kind of a challenge, but I think the main thing that is that the customer was open that they needed to do that, right? They needed to do that rearrange so that they can get more out of the software itself.
Right. And for those of you that are wondering if you need to start from scratch again, the answer is no, that's not what we're saying. What we
No.
have done for some of our customers is that we have introduced these naming nomenclatures. We have rearranged a hierarchy. And then out of that hierarchy, we were able to take the current assets and place them in all the right branches. So don't be alarmed. We're not saying that you have to start from scratch.
Yeah.
It's fixable. That's the point here. Now, Luis, let's talk about the different options for example, just looking at the asset nomenclature.
Yeah.
What standards do we have out there that can help?
Well, we certainly, from our experience, we have been engaging with clients and customers that have used the KKS identification for power plants. There is.
What does KKS stands for? Can you say it?
All right. I just
Consumption
shorted out.
system.
Yeah,
Like
I
that.
just shorted out to KKS because
Our German is terrible. If Bas was
yeah.
here, he would be pronouncing it correctly. But our German is non-existent. What else? What else can we use?
There is the RDS for power plants. There's another type of nomenclature that exists. There's some ISOs, for example, the 14,224 for the oil and gas business. And then the other way that we have seen people use it, their actual PNID drawings, because those were generated at the beginning of time, right, of a power plant, for example, and basically all the data it's there. So that typically also has some relation in terms of codification use for those. So that is also one good place to look for where to start, right? Or how to name your asset systems and so on.
Yeah, I guess that the bottom line here is whatever you use something, please, right?
Correct.
Going back to power plants, what we've seen is that KKS has been there for a long time, and it's very well known within the thermal power generation industry. Now with renewables, RDS, it's kind of becoming the de facto standard for things like wind farms, solar farms, and we see that happening, right? Perhaps what we'll see is that for like new thermal power plants, RDS might be used, but we see a clear distinction between KKS for like thermal and then RDS for renewables. Okay.
Yeah.
PNIDs present an interesting challenge. And Luis, I think you've seen this many times over, right? Where the drawings were made, 40, 30, 20, 10 years ago. And then it's kind of hard to relate to that.
Yeah.
But what kind of options, let's say that you have your old drawings laying around, what kind of options do we have for using some of those PNIDs for naming our assets?
Well, typically your drawings have some type of data encrusted into them, right? That is something that can be used to extract it out, to kind of create your actual hierarchy, your actual registry, right, of equipment out of it. So there are visualization tools that can be coupled with your typical EAM softwares, right? And you can extract from there and basically create right? You don't have to think about, yeah, I'm gonna name this pump or this area over here, right? No, the PID already has something, so you can rely on that. And typically, that is an actual guidance, because if the drawing is from the beginning of when that power plant was constructed, then typically it's a good starting point on that end, right? And helps you guide on in terms of how can I name my other equipment below that main area that I'm looking
Mhm.
at that point.
Should I say that this section of our podcast is sponsored by our Italian friends from OpenCAD? OpenCAD, making your life so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a tremendous model for EAM, where you actually can just plug it in there. Basically, it reads out everything, and you determine which things are you going to use for your registry and which things you're not going to be using. So it identifies, it helps you understand what's all the things that are in there, and basically give you that first round of view of, yeah, I can use this and that to create my registry, and then I can compose my whole structure from it. So
Okay.
it is one, and the newest version is absolutely tremendous, right, in terms of the usage and how people can uh, do that virtual work management on it.
Okay, so I guess Giuseppe owns some Amarone and Parmigiano Reggiano, no? Super, super. So let's switch gears a little bit here. I'm going to turn on the PowerPoint just to illustrate a couple of examples of actually we're going to show a little bit of KKS, then an example of how it comes together, and then from there we're going to look at why having a hierarchy in the first place, right? The benefits that you'll derive from there. So let me just turn this on, show the presentation, and we can talk some more about that. Just give me 1 second till I get this going, and it's right here. Cool. All right. So Luis, here's the section of the KKS system, and it's looking at a diesel power plant. Specifically, we're down to the generating assets.
Yeah.
Can you just briefly go through the hierarchy just to give us a sense?
Yeah, typically, so if you see, starts with the MJ that defines the whole diesel engine plan in this case, and then starts to drive that naming, right? So you have MJA, which is actually the actual engine, right? So imagine the whole engine as a system itself within the diesel engine plan, right? And then you have other components that help on the generation side, right? So for the engine, diesel one, you will have your turbochargers, right? You need your liquid system, your air intake cooling system, right? Your fuel system, all of these that helps drive the main idea of generating right electricity in this case.
So let's
Uh,
let's move forward and let's show our friends out there how this comes together.
right.
There we go. So
All right.
this is kind of the exploded view to a certain level
Yeah.
of the diesel engine.
Correct. So, for example, in this case, right, you start with, if you look at that initial level, it says 01, diesel engine unit 1. So if you see over there, then that 01 you can have, if you have 6 of them, then it's 01, 02, 03, right, and so on. So each of them will be an actual engine, right, physical engine out there. And then you start with the other, let's call it like subsystems beneath that main system, right? So we start, for example, with the 01 GN, the all water drain, or the 01 MJA, which is exactly the actual engine, right, itself, right? And then from there we can start drill down to other subsystems within that engine. itself, right? Which is the fuel drain, the governor, right? The splash oil temperature system, right? If you look at the nomenclature, right? We start with the 01, and as we start to drill down, we continue to use the current nomenclature of KKS, right? MJA, and then MJA 10, that is for that specific fuel oil drain. And then you can drill down a little bit more and say, well, within that MJA 10 fuel oil drain system, you have the engine control station, right? So if you see, it starts to drill down, but you kind of maintain that nomenclature, right? So you know exactly that you are, at the moment that you find that engine control station and you see that 01 MJA, it refers to the diesel engine unit 1, the actual engine system, right? And then the fuel oil drain, right? So it guides you where that equipment is located within the whole power plant, right? So you have a sense of where that person, where that technician should go in and do some work or do some preventive or predictive maintenance out of it. So typically the nomenclature guides you, right? It identifies where not only physically it is located, but in terms of the actual system, what is it that you're going to be working with?
Right. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right?
Right.
The standard itself, it's going to guide you in doing two things: naming the actual assets and then defining the hierarchy. So all we've done here is follow the nomenclature, and that drives the creation of the hierarchy also. Back in the old days, we would have these discussions with our customers during design sessions, and they will kill each other just trying to come up with some logical way of putting this together. And we kind of like had to step back and say, hey, let's go this way, right? So it certainly helps. Now, if we look at and try to answer the question, why does the hierarchy matters, right? So first take on it, it's meters, right? So typically within these systems, you have different maintenance schedules that are based on the number of running hours, number of starts. But if you look at the engine components, right, some of them may require a different type of maintenance depending on the running hours, on the accumulated for the overall engine. So Luis, can you expand a little bit more?
Yeah. So typically, if you see over here, that diesel engine 01 that it's in there, it has accumulated 11,620 hours, right? If you see and you start drill down the hierarchy, you're gonna see that cylinders, right, which is an actual, like a kind of like a position within that engine. It also accumulates that amount of 11,620 hours, right? But if we drill down a little bit more within that cylinder, we're gonna find there's actual equipment that there's although there will be internal work that is gonna be performed, but also external work, right? You're probably gonna get some hired service to do some type of preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance on them, right? So for example, in there, you find the cylinder head, the connecting rod, piston, right? Everything that is within that engine cylinder, A1 in this case. If you see over there, then the connecting rod has the same amount of accumulated hours. But if you see the cylinder head, it only has 4,320 hours, which means that at some point, that cylinder head was taken out from that hierarchy. It was fixed, it was refurbished, right?
Retool, yeah.
Yeah, and then they put it back in the shelf for the next time that they weren't going to use it. Now that temp came in and they took another cylinder head and they substitute that one, they replace it with this cylinder head. So as the engine continues to accumulate hours, and let's say that it accumulates 80 more hours on this, then the diesel engine will have 11,700 hours in there. And that cylinder head will accumulate 80 hours as well, right? Because at the moment that it's within that hierarchy, it's going to start accumulating the same amount of hours as that main engine over there. So it's going to
Right.
drive it to
This is
4,400.
this is precisely where the hierarchy comes in handy, right?
Yeah.
So let me move forward to the next, right? So again, cost, right? It's one of the main reasons why we certainly can use a hierarchy. So can you talk to the components of cost within our maintenance universe?
Yeah. Typically on the maintenance, you have two things, right? You have items, you have your parts, and you have your labor, which can be your internal or it can be external, right? If you want to know exactly how much is your maintenance cost, these two things need to be there, right? You need to know exactly how much you are investing and expending on parts, and then how much you are investing in labor, right? Either internally or externally, right? As a contractor in there.
So what
So it
happens,
is
right?
important to have it. Yeah.
So what happens is that all of these different costs, they accumulate at the asset level. And then through the hierarchy, again, these things will roll up, right? And will give us a complete picture, either at the plant level. I think there are some people out there that still call it the powerhouse, where the actual generators are. And then for each individual component, right? So these are the kind of things that by means of having a well-structured hierarchy, right, you're gonna be able to get. Okay.
Yeah.
Now moving on. This is also an example of why having a hierarchy or the right hierarchy matters, right? We've talked to this before. MAHI stands for Maintenance Asset Health Index, right? So it is a set of metrics that we have developed to basically look at the maintenance activities, and from there, using the transactional data, being able to derive what is the health of that asset, right? So in the case of a diesel plant, right, we look at what is the MAHI for the engine itself, and obviously that gets broken down. What is the MAHI for the generator? What is the MAHI for my control systems? What is the MAHI for my balance of plant? What is the MAHI for my transformer, right? So again, the only way in which we can come up with this kind of metrics, these kind of KPIs, is by having the right hierarchy in place to begin with, right? So there are many more examples. We chose to discuss these three in the interest of time. I think this would be a good example of why these things matter. And again, if we want to look into the future, if we want to do predictive maintenance, certainly we need to have these fundamentals in place. Anything else, Luis, before we wrap it up here?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a chance to revisit your hierarchy, your asset. I mean, if I believe that as a continuous improvement process, there's always space to improve, not only on how we do our maintenance, but how we can manage our different assets. So if you have the chance to do that and revisit it and try to review it, make sure that it's aligned with what you have out there in your powerhouse, then go, please do so, right? It will give you good results at the end.
Yeah, enterprise asset management, asset performance management, these are not destinations, right? These are journeys.
Yeah.
If you want to have a super perfect 100% ready asset registry and hierarchy from day one, I think it's a really, really tall order. It's easier to use, for example, something like AKS to set up, the main systems and subsystems, and then take it from there, right? So those are the kind of practical approaches that we can take. And like you just said, right, build from that, but never stop looking at this, right, and improving upon what you have. Whether you are a power plant, whether you're doing transmission and distribution of electricity, or whether you are doing oil and gas, these concepts apply to all industries, right? These are just examples of the industries in which we probably spend most of our time. Luis, so any closing remarks?
Well, again, it is one thing that it seems basic, but if you do it correctly, if you try to manage it, it will give you good results. So I encourage you to go at it and review your asset, your registry. Make sure that that is aligned, and certainly it will give you good results, right?
Excellent. So thank you, Luis, for joining us in this edition of the EAM Experts at Visual K, our first episode of 2022. If you want to find out more about the next episodes, and you can always go to LinkedIn, obviously to our visualk.com page, Twitter, and then the podcast itself, it's being published in our blog. You can also find it in LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Breaker. So please join us again for our next episode. And I'm almost certain that Ernesto will be back. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.